Pennington. It wasn't young Allerton. I presume it wasn't Fleetwood. Let's hear who it was for a change. My friend, I am just about to tell you. There was a knock on the door. Race uttered a muffled curse. It was Dr. Besner and Cornelia. The latter was looking upset. "Oh, Colonel Race," she exclaimed. "Miss Bowers has just told me about Cousin Marie. It's been the most dreadful shock. She said she couldn't bear the responsibility all by herself any longer, and that I'd better know, as I was one of the family. I just couldn't believe it at first, but Dr. Besner here has been just wonderful." "Oh, no, protested the doctor modestly. "He's been so kind explaining it all, how people really can't help it. He's had kleptomaniacs in his clinic, and he's explained to me how it's very often due to a deep-seated neurosis." Cornelia repeated the words with awe. "It's planted very deeply in the subconscious. Sometimes it's just some little thing that happened when you were a child, and he's cured people by getting them to think back and remember what that little thing was." Cornelia paused, drew a deep breath, and started off again. "But it's worrying me dreadfully in case it all gets out. It would be terrible, too terrible in New York. Why, all the tabloids would have it. Cousin Marie and Mother and everybody, they'd never be able to hold up their heads again." Race sighed. "That's all right. This is Hush-Hush House." "Beg your pardon, Colonel Race?" "What I was endeavouring to say was, anything short of murder is being hushed up." "Oh, well, I'm so relieved. I've just been worrying and worrying." "You have a heart that is too tender," said Besner, and patted her benevolently on the shoulder. "She has a very sensitive and beautiful nature." "Oh, I haven't really. You're too kind." Poirot murmured, "Have you seen any more of Mr. Ferguson?" "No. Cousin Marie's been talking about him." "It seems that this young man is highly born. I must confess he does not look it. His clothes are terrible. Not for a moment does he appear a well-bred man." "What do you think, mademoiselle?" "I think he must be just plain crazy." "How is your patient, doctor?" "Oh, he is doing splendidly. I have just reassured Fräulein de Belfort. Would you believe it, I found her in despair, just because the fellow had a bit of a temperature this afternoon. But what could be more natural? It is amazing he is not in a high fever now. But no, he is like some of our peasants. He has a magnificent constitution, the constitution of an ox. I have seen them with deep wounds, and they hardly notice it. It is the same with Mr. Doyle. His pulse is steady, his temperature only slightly above normal. I was able to poo-poo the little lady's fears. All the same, it is ridiculous, Nicola. 1 minute you shoot a man, the next you are in hysterics that he may not be doing well." "She loves him terribly, you see." "It is not sensible. Now, if you loved a man, would you try and shoot him? No, you are sensible." "I don't like things that go off with bangs anyway." "Naturally you do not. You're very feminine." Race interrupted this scene of heavy approval. "Since Doyle is all right, there's no reason I shouldn't come along and resume our talk of this afternoon. He was telling me something about a telegram." Dr. Besner's bulk moved up and down appreciatively. "That was funny, that. Doyle, he tells me about it. It was a telegram all about vegetables. Potatoes, artichokes, leeks." "Pardon?" With a stifled exclamation, Race had sat up in his chair. "My God, so that's it! Riquetti!" He looked around on all three uncomprehending faces. "It's a new code. It was used in the South African Republic. Potatoes mean machine guns, artichokes are high explosives, and so on. Riquetti is no more an archaeologist than I am. He's a very dangerous agitator, a man who was killed more than once, and I'll swear he's killed once again. Mrs. Doyle opened that telegram by mistake, you see. If she were ever to repeat what was in it before me, he knew his goose would be cooked. Am I right, Poirot? Hey, is Riquetti the man?" "He is your man. I always thought there was something wrong about him. He was almost too word-perfect in his role. It was all archaeologist, not enough human being." But it was not Rossetti who killed Lynette Doyle. For some time now I have known what I may express as the first half of the murder. Now I know the second half also. The picture is complete. But you understand that although I know what must have happened, I have no proof that it happened. Intellectually the case is satisfying. Actually it is profoundly unsatisfactory. There is only one hope, a confession from the murderer. Ah, that would be a miracle, surely. I think not. Not under the circumstances. But who is it? Aren't you going to tell us? Poirot's eyes ranged quietly over the three of them, Race smiling sardonically, Besner still looking sceptical, Cornelia, her mouth hanging a little open, gazing at him with eager eyes. Merry. I like an audience, I must confess. I am vain, you see. I am puffed up with conceit. I like to say, see how clever is Hercule Poirot. Race shifted a little in his chair. Well, just how clever is Hercule Poirot? Shaking his head sadly from side to side, Poirot said, To begin with, I was stupid, incredibly stupid. To me the stumbling block was the pistol, Jacqueline de Belfort's pistol. Why had that pistol not been left on the scene of a crime? The idea of the murderer was quite plainly to incriminate her. Why then did the murderer take it away? I was so stupid that I thought of all sorts of fantastic reasons, but the real one was very simple. The murderer took it away because he had to take it away, because he had no choice in the matter. You and I, my friend, started our investigation with a preconceived idea. That idea was that the crime was committed on the spur of the moment, without any preliminary planning. Somebody wished to remove Lynette Doyle, and had seized their opportunity to do so at a moment when the crime would almost certainly be attributed to Jacqueline de Belfort. It therefore followed that the person in question had overheard the scene between Jacqueline and Simon Doyle, and had obtained possession of the pistol after the others had left the saloon. But, my friends, if that preconceived idea was wrong, the whole aspect of the case altered. And it was wrong. There was no spontaneous crime committed on the spur of a moment. It was, on the contrary, very carefully planned and accurately timed, with all the details meticulously worked out beforehand, even to the drugging of Hercule Poirot's bottle of wine on the night in question. Yes, it is so. I was put to sleep, so that there should be no possibility of my participating in the events of the night. It did just occur to me as a possibility. I drank wine, my two companions at table drink whisky and mineral water respectively. Nothing easier than to slip a dose of harmless narcotic into my bottle of wine. The bottles stand on the tables all day. But I dismissed the thought. It had been a hot day. I had been unusually tired. It was not really extraordinary that I should for once have slept heavily instead of lightly as I usually do. You see, I was still in the grip of the preconceived idea. If I had been drugged, that would have implied premeditation. It would mean that before 7:30, when dinner is served, the crime had already been decided upon. And that, always from the point of the preconceived idea, was absurd. The first blow to the preconceived idea was when the pistol was recovered from the Nile. To begin with, if we were right in our assumptions, the pistol ought never to have been thrown overboard at all. And there was more to follow. You, Dr. Besner, examined Lynette's body. You will remember that the wound showed signs of scorching. That is to say that the pistol had been placed close against her head before being fired. Yes, that is exact. But when the pistol was found, it was wrapped in a velvet stole, and that velvet showed definite signs that the pistol had been fired through its folds, presumably under the impression that that would deaden the sound of a shot. But if the pistol had been fired through the velvet, there would have been no sign of burning on the victim's skin. Therefore, the shot fired by Jacqueline de Belfort at Simon Doyle. No, there have been 2 witnesses for that shooting. We knew all about it. So, it appears, therefore, A third shot had been fired. One we know nothing about. But only 2 shots had been fired from a pistol, and there was no hint or suggestion of another shot. Here we were face to face with a very curious unexplained circumstance. The next interesting point was the fact that in Lynette Doyle's cabin I found 2 bottles of coloured nail polish. Now, ladies, they very often vary the colour of their nails, but so far Lynette Doyle's nails have always been the shade called cardinal, a deep dark red. The other bottle was labelled rose, which is a shade of pale pink, but the few drops remaining in the bottle were not pale pink, but a bright red. I was sufficiently curious to take out the stopper and sniff. Instead of the usual strong odour of pear drops, the bottle smelt of vinegar. That is to say, it suggested that the drop or 2 of fluid in it was red ink. Now, there is no reason why Madame Doyle should not have had a bottle of red ink, but it would have been more natural if she had had the red ink in a red ink bottle and not in a nail polish bottle. It suggested a link with a faintly stained handkerchief which had been wrapped around the pistol. Red ink washes out quickly, but it always leaves a pale pink stain. I should perhaps have arrived at the truth with these slender indications, but an event occurred which rendered all doubt superfluous. Louise Bourget was killed in circumstances which pointed unmistakably to the fact that she had been blackmailing the murderer. Not only was a fragment of a 1,000,000-franc note found clasped in her hand, but I remembered the very significant words she had used that morning. Now listen carefully, for here is the crux of the whole matter. When I asked her if she had seen anything the previous night, she gave this very curious answer.
Naturally, if I had been unable to sleep, if I had mounted the stairs, then perhaps I might have seen this assassin, this monster, enter or leave Madame's cabin.
Now, what exactly did that tell us? Besner, his nose wrinkling with intellectual interest, replied promptly.
It told you that she had mounted the stairs, huh?
No, you fail to see the point. Why should she have said that to us?
To convey a hint.
But why hint to us? If she knows who the murderer is, there are 2 courses open to her: to tell us the truth, or to hold her tongue and demand money for her silence from the person concerned. She does neither. She neither says promptly, "I saw nobody, I was asleep," nor does she say, "Yes, I saw someone, and it was so-and-so." Why use that significant, indeterminate rigmarole of words?
Pablo, there can only be one reason. She is hinting to the murderer.
Therefore the murderer must have been present at the time. But besides myself and Colonel Race, only 2 people were present: Simon Doyle and Dr. Besner. The doctor sprang up with a roar.
What is that you say? You accuse me again? It is ridiculous. You are beneath contempt.
Be quiet. I'm telling you what I thought at the time. Let us remain impersonal.
It doesn't mean he thinks it's you now.
So, it lay there, between Simon Doyle and Dr. Besner. But what reason has Besner to kill Lynette Doyle? None, so far as I know. Simon Doyle, then? That was impossible. There were plenty of witnesses who could swear that Simon Doyle never left the saloon that evening until the quarrel broke out, and that he was wounded, and it would then have been physically impossible for him to have done so. Had I good evidence on both those points? Yes. I had the evidence of Mademoiselle Robson, of Jim Fanthorpe, and of Jacqueline de Belfort as to the first. And I had the skilled testimony of Dr. Besner and of Mademoiselle Bowers as to the second. No doubt was possible. So, Dr. Besner must be the guilty one.
That it is not true, I tell you.
In favour of this theory, there was the fact that the maid had been stabbed with a surgical knife. On the other hand, Besner had deliberately called attention to this fact. And then, my friends, a second perfectly indisputable fact became apparent to me. Louise Bourget's hint could not have been intended for Dr. Besner, because she could perfectly well have spoken to him in private at any time she liked. There was one person, and one person only, who corresponded to her necessity: Simon Doyle. Simon Doyle was wounded, was constantly attended by a doctor, was in that doctor's cabin. It was to him, therefore, that she risked saying those ambiguous words, in case she might not get another chance. And I remember how she had gone on, turning to him.
Monsieur, I implore you, you see how it is. What can I say?
And his answer, "My good girl, don't be a fool. Nobody thinks you saw or heard anything. You'll be quite all right. I'll look after you. Nobody's accusing you of anything." That was the assurance she wanted, and she got it.
"Oh, Kitty's foolish. No. Do you think a man with a fractured bone and splint on his leg could go walking about the boat stabbing people? I tell you it was impossible for Simon Doyle to leave his cabin."
"I know. That is quite true. The thing was impossible. It was impossible, but it was also true. There could be only one logical meaning behind Louise Bourget's words. So, I returned to the beginning and reviewed the crime in the light of this new knowledge. Was it possible that in the period preceding the quarrel Simon Doyle had left the saloon and the others had forgotten or not noticed it? I could not see that very possible. Could the skilled testimony of Dr. Besner and Mademoiselle Bowers be disregarded? Again I felt sure it could not. But I remembered there was a gap between the two. Simon Doyle had been alone in the saloon for a period of 5 minutes, and the skilled testimony of Dr. Besner only applied to the time after that period. For that period we only had the evidence of visual appearance, and though apparently that was perfectly sound, it was no longer certain. What had actually been seen, leaving assumption out of the question? Mademoiselle Robson had seen Mademoiselle de Belfort fire her pistol, had seen Simon Doyle collapse on a chair, had seen him clasp a handkerchief to his leg, and seen that handkerchief gradually soak through red. What had Monsieur Fanthorpe heard and seen? He heard a shot. He found Doyle with a red-stained handkerchief clasped to his leg. What had happened then? Doyle had been very insistent that Mademoiselle de Belfort should be got away, that she should not be left alone, and that he suggested that Fanthorpe should get hold of the doctor. Accordingly, Mademoiselle Robson and Monsieur Fanthorpe got out with Mademoiselle de Belfort, and for the next 5 minutes they were busy on the port side of the deck. Mademoiselle Bowers, Dr. Besner's, and Mademoiselle de Belfort's cabins are all on the port side. 2 minutes are all that Simon Doyle needs. He picks up the pistol from under the sofa, slips out of his shoes, runs like a hare silently along the starboard deck, enters his wife's cabin, creeps up to her as she lies asleep, shoots her through the head, puts the bottle that contained the red ink on her washstand. It mustn't be found on him. Runs back, gets hold of Mademoiselle Van Schuyler's velvet stole, which he has quietly stuffed on the side of a chair, in readiness, muffles it round the pistol, and fires a bullet into his leg. His chair, into which he falls, in genuine agony this time, is by a window. He lifts the window and throws the pistol, wrapped up with the telltale handkerchief in the velvet stole, into the Nile.
"It's impossible."
No, my friend, not impossible. Remember the evidence of Tim Allerton. He heard a pop, followed by a splash. And he heard something else. The footsteps of a man running past his door. But nobody could have been running along the starboard side of the deck. What he heard was the stockinged feet of Simon Doyle running past his cabin. I still say it's impossible. No man could work out the whole caboodle like that in a flash, especially a chap like Doyle, who's slow in his mental processes, but very quick and deft in his physical actions. Well, yes, but he wouldn't be capable of thinking the whole thing out. But he did not think it out himself, my friend. That is where we were all wrong. It looked like a crime committed on the spur of a moment, but it was not a crime committed on the spur of a moment. As I say, it was a very cleverly planned and well thought-out piece of work. It could not be chance that Simon Doyle had a bottle of red ink in his pocket. No, it must be design. It was not chance that Jacqueline de Belfort's foot kicked the pistol under the settee, where it would be out of sight and unremembered until later. Jacqueline! Certainly. The two halves of a murder. What gave Simon his alibi? The shot fired by Jacqueline. What gave Jacqueline her alibi? The insistence of Simon, which resulted in a hospital nurse remaining with her all night. There, between the two of them, you get all the qualities you require. The cool, resourceful planning brain, Jacqueline de Belfort's brain, and a man of action to carry it out with incredible swiftness and timing. Look at it the right way, and it answers every question. Simon Doyle and Jacqueline had been lovers. Realize they are still lovers, and it is all clear. Simon does away with his rich wife, inherits her money, and in due course will marry his old love. It was all very ingenious. A persecution of Madame Doyle by Jacqueline, all part of the plan. Simon's pretended rage. And yet there were lapses. He held forth to me once about possessive women, held forth with real bitterness. It ought to have been clear to me that it was his wife he was thinking about, not Jacqueline. Then his manner to his wife in public. An ordinary, inarticulate Englishman such as Simon Doyle is very embarrassed at showing affection. As Simon was not a very good actor, he overdid the devoted manner. That conversation I had with Mademoiselle Jacqueline, too, when she pretended that someone had overheard. I saw no one. There was no one. It was a useful red herring later. Then, one night on this boat, I thought I heard Simon and Lynette outside of my cabin. He was saying, "We have got to go through with it now." It was Doyle, all right, but it was to Jacqueline he was speaking. The final drama was perfectly planned and timed. There was a sleeping draught for me, in case I might put an inconvenient finger in the pie. There was the selection of Mademoiselle Robson as a witness, the working up of the scene, Mademoiselle de Belfort's exaggerated remorse and hysterics. She made a good deal of noise in case the shot should be heard. En verity, it was an extraordinarily clever idea. Jacqueline says she has shot Doyle. Mademoiselle Robson says so. Fanthorpe says so. And when Simon's leg is examined, he has been shot. It looks unanswerable. For both of them is the perfect alibi. At the cost, it is true, of a certain amount of pain and risk to Simon Doyle, but it is necessary that his wound should definitely disable him. And then the plan goes wrong. Louise Bourget has been wakeful. She has come up the stairway, and she has seen Simon Doyle run along to his wife's cabin and come back. Easy enough to piece together what has happened the following day. And so she makes her greedy bid for hush money, and in so doing signs her death warrant.
But Mr. Doyle couldn't have killed her.
No, the other partner did that murder. As soon as he can, Simon Doyle asks to see Jacqueline. He even asks me to leave them alone together. He tells her then of a new danger. They must act at once. He knows where Besner's scalpels are kept. After the crime, the scalpel is wiped and returned, and then, very late and rather out of breath, Jacqueline de Belfort hurries into lunch. And still all is not well. For Madame Otterbourne has seen Jacqueline go into Louise Bourget's cabin, and she comes hot-foot to tell Simon about it. Jacqueline is the murderess. Do you remember how Simon shouted at the poor woman? Nerves, we thought, but the door was open, and he was trying to convey the danger to his accomplice. She heard, and she acted like lightning. She remembered Pennington had talked of a revolver. She got hold of it, crept up outside the door, listened, and at the critical moment fired. She boasted once that she was a good shot, and her boast was not an idle one. I remarked after the third crime that there were 3 ways the murderer could have gone. I meant that he could have gone aft, in which case Tim Allerton was the criminal. He could have gone over the side, very improbable, or he could have gone into a cabin. Jacqueline's cabin was just 2 away from Dr. Besner's. She had only to throw down the revolver, bolt into the cabin, ruffle her hair, and fling herself down on the bunk. It was risky, but it was the only possible chance. There was silence. Then Race asked, "What happened to the first bullet fired at Doyle by the girl?" "I think it went into the table. There is a recently made hole there. I think Doyle had time to dig it out of a penknife and fling it through the window. He had, of course, a spare cartridge, so that it would appear that only 2 shots had been fired." Cornelia sighed. "They thought of everything. It's horrible." Poirot was silent, but it was not a modest silence. His eyes seemed to be saying, "You are wrong. They didn't allow for Hercule Poirot." Aloud he said, "And now, Doctor, we will go and have a word with your patient." It was very much later that evening that Hercule Poirot came and knocked on the door of the cabin. A voice said, "Come in," and he entered. Jacqueline de Belfort was sitting in a chair. In another chair, close against the wall, sat the big stewardess. Jacqueline's eyes surveyed Poirot thoughtfully. She made a gesture towards the stewardess. "Can she go?" Poirot nodded to the woman, and she went out. Poirot drew up her chair and sat down near Jacqueline. Neither of them spoke. Poirot's face was unhappy. In the end, it was the girl who spoke first.
"Well, it's all over. You were too clever for us, Monsieur Poirot."
Poirot sighed. He spread out his hands. He seemed strangely dumb.
"All the same, I can't really see that you had much proof. You were quite right, of course, but if we'd bluffed it out—"
"In no other way, mademoiselle, could the thing have happened."
"That's proof enough for a logical mind, but I don't believe it would have convinced a jury. Oh, well, it can't be helped. You sprang it all on Simon. He went down like a 9-pin. He just lost his head completely, poor lamb. Admitted everything. He's a bad loser."
"But you, mademoiselle, are a good loser."
"Oh, yes, I'm a good loser, all right." "Oh, don't mind so much, Monsieur Poirot. About me, I mean. Because you do mind, don't you?"
"Yes, mademoiselle."
"But it wouldn't have occurred to you to let me off?"
"No."
"No. It's no use being sentimental. I might do it again. I'm not a safe person any longer. I can feel that myself. It's so dreadfully easy, killing people. You begin to feel it doesn't matter, that it's only you that matters. It's dangerous, that. You did your best for me, you know. That night at Aswan, you told me not to open my heart to evil. Did you realize then what was in my mind?"
He shook his head. "I only knew that what I said was true."
"It was true. I could have stopped then, you know. I nearly did. I could have told Simon that I wouldn't go on with it. But then, perhaps... Oh. Would you like to hear about it? From the beginning?"
"If you care to tell me, mademoiselle."
"I think I want to tell you. It was all very simple, really, you see. Simon and I loved each other."
It was a matter-of-fact statement, yet underneath the lightness of her tone there were echoes. "And for you, love would have been enough, but not for him."
"You might put it that way, perhaps. But you don't quite understand Simon. You see, he's always wanted money so dreadfully. He liked all the things you get with money. Horses and yachts and sport. Nice things, all of them. Things a man ought to be keen about. And he'd never have been able to have any of them. He's awfully simple, Simon is. He wants things just as a child wants them, you know. Terribly. All the same, he never tried to marry anybody rich and horrid. He wasn't that sort. And then we met and well, sort of settled him down. Only we didn't see when we'd be able to marry. He'd had rather a decent job, but he'd lost it. In a way, it was his own fault. He tried to do something smart over money and got found out at once. I don't believe he really meant to be dishonest. He just thought it was the sort of thing people did in the city. A flicker passed over her listener's face, but he guarded his tongue. There we were, up against it, and I thought of Lynette and her new country house, and I rushed off to her. You know, Monsieur Poirot, I loved Lynette, really I did. She was my best friend, and I never dreamed that anything would ever come between us. I just thought how lucky it was she was rich. It might make all the difference to me and Simon if she'd give him a job. And she was awfully sweet about it, and told me to bring Simon down to see her. It was about then you saw us that night at chez ma tante. We were making whoopee, although we couldn't really afford it. Oh, what I'm going to say is quite true. Even though Lynette is dead, it doesn't alter the truth. That's why I'm not really sorry about her, even now. Because she went all out to get Simon away from me. That is the absolute truth. I don't think she hesitated for more than a minute. I was her friend, and she didn't care. She just went bald-headed for Simon. And Simon didn't care about her. I talked a lot to you about glamour, but of course that wasn't true. He didn't want Lynette. He thought her good-looking but terribly bossy. He hated bossy women. The whole thing embarrassed him frightfully. But he did like the thought of her money. Of course I saw that. And at last I suggested to him that it might be a good thing if he got rid of me and married Lynette. But he scouted the idea. He said, money or no money, it would be hell to be married to her. He said his idea of having money was to have it himself, not to have a rich wife holding the purse strings.
I'd be a kind of damn prince consort. Anyway, you know I don't want anyone but you.
I think I know when the idea came into his head. Because he said one day,
You know, if I'd any luck, I'd marry her, and she'd die in about a year and leave me all the boodle.
And then a queer startled look came into his eyes, because that was when he first thought of it. He talked about it a good deal, one way and another, about how convenient it would be if Lynette died. I said it was an awful idea, and then he shut up about it. And then one day I found him reading all about arsenic. I taxed him with it then. He just laughed.
Nothing venture, nothing have. It's about the only time in my life I shall be anywhere near touching a fat lot of money.
After a bit, I saw he'd made up his mind, and I was terrified, simply terrified, because you see I realized he'd never pull it off. He's so childishly simple. He'd have no kind of subtlety about it, and he's got no imagination. He'd probably have just bunged arsenic into her and assumed the doctor would think she'd died of gastritis. He always thought things would go right. So, you see, I had to come into it, to look after him.
She said it very simply, but in complete good faith. Poirot had no doubts whatever that her motive had been exactly what she said it was. She herself had not coveted Lynette Ridgway's money. She had loved Simon Doyle, had loved him beyond reason, and beyond rectitude, and beyond pity. I thought, trying to work out a plan. It seemed to me that the basis of the idea ought to be a kind of two-handed alibi. You know, if Simon and I could somehow or other give evidence against each other, but actually that evidence would clear us of everything. It would be easy enough for me to pretend to hate Simon. It was quite a likely thing to happen under the circumstances. Then, if Lynette was killed, I should probably be suspected, so it would be better if I was suspected right away. We worked out details little by little. I wanted it to be so that if anything went wrong, they'd get me and not Simon. But Simon was worried about me. The only thing I was glad about was that I hadn't got to do it. I simply couldn't have. Not go along in cold blood and kill her when she was asleep. You see, I hadn't forgiven her. I think I could have killed her face to face, but not the other way. Anyway, we worked everything out carefully. Even then, Simon went and wrote a J in blood, which was a silly, melodramatic thing to do. That, you see, that's just the sort of thing he would think of. But it went off all right. Yes, it is not your fault Louise Bourget could not sleep that night. And afterwards, mademoiselle? She met his eyes squarely.
Yes, it's rather horrible, isn't it? I can't believe that I did that. I know now what you meant by opening your heart to evil. You know pretty well how it happened. Louise made it clear to Simon that she knew. Simon got you to bring me to him. As soon as we were alone together, he told me what had happened. He told me what I'd got to do. I wasn't even horrified. I was so afraid, so deadly afraid. That's what murder does to you. Simon and I were safe, quite safe, except for this miserable blackmailing French girl. I took her all the money we could get hold of. I pretended to grovel. And then, when she was counting the money, I did it. It was quite easy. That's what's so horribly, horribly frightening about it. It was so terribly easy. And even then we weren't safe. Mrs. Otterbourne had seen me. She came triumphantly along the deck looking for you and Colonel Race. I'd no time to think. I just acted like a flash. It was almost exciting. I knew it was touch and go that time. That seemed to make it better. Do you remember when you came into my cabin afterwards? You said that you were not sure why you'd come. I was so miserable and so terrified, because I thought Simon was going to die. And I was hoping it. Yes. It would have been better for him that way. That was not my thought. Jacqueline looked at the sternness of his face. She said gently, "Don't mind so much for me, Monsieur Poirot. After all, I've lived hard always, you know. If we'd won out, I'd have been very happy and enjoyed things, and probably should never have regretted anything. As it is, well, one goes through with it. I suppose the stewardess is in attendance to see I don't try and hang myself or swallow a miraculous capsule of prussic acid, as people always do in books. You needn't be afraid. I shan't do that. It will be easier for Simon if I'm standing by." Poirot got up. Jacqueline rose also. She said with a sudden smile, "Do you remember when I said I must follow my star? And you said it might be a false star. And I said, 'That very bad star, that star fall down.'" He went out to the deck, with her laughter ringing in his ears. It was early dawn when they came into Shalal. The rocks came down grimly to the water's edge. "Well," said Race, "we've done our job. I've arranged for Ricchetti to be taken ashore first. Glad we've got him. He's been a slippery customer, I can tell you. Given us the slip dozens of times. And we must get hold of a stretcher for Doyle. Remarkable how he went to pieces." "Not really. That boyish type of criminal is usually intensely vain. Once prick the bubble of their self-esteem and it is finished. They go to pieces like children." "Deserves to be hanged. He's a cold-blooded scoundrel. I'm sorry for the girl, but there's nothing to be done about it." "People say love justifies everything, but that is not true. Women who care for men as Jacqueline cares for Simon Doyle are very dangerous. It is what I said when I saw her first. She cares too much, that little one. It is true." Cornelia Robson came up beside them. "Oh, we're nearly in." She paused a minute or two. "I've been with her." "With Mademoiselle de Belfort?" "Yes. I felt it was kind of awful for her boxed up with that stewardess. Cousin Marie's very angry, though, I'm afraid." Miss Van Schuyler was progressing slowly down the deck towards them. Her eyes were venomous.
"Cornelia! You have behaved outrageously. I shall send you straight home."
"I'm sorry, Cousin Marie. I'm going to get married."
"Oh, you've seen sense at last."
Ferguson came striding round the corner of the deck.
"Cornelia, what's this I hear? It's not true."
"It's quite true. I'm going to marry Dr. Besner. He asked me last night."
"Why are you going to marry him? Simply because he's rich?"
"No, I'm not. I like him. He's kind and he knows a lot. And I've always been interested in sick folks and clinics.
and I shall have just a wonderful life with him.
Do you mean to say
You would rather marry that disgusting old man than me?
Yes, I would. You are not reliable. You wouldn't be at all a comfortable sort of person to live with. And he is not old. He's not 50 yet.
He's got a stomach.
Well, I've got round shoulders. What one looks like doesn't matter. He says I really could help him in his work, and he's going to teach me all about neuroses.
She moved away. Ferguson said to Poirot, "Do you think she really means that?"
"Certainly."
"She prefers that pompous old bore to me?"
"Undoubtedly."
The girl's mad.
She is a woman of an original mind. It is probably the first time you have met one.
The boat drew into the landing stage. A cordon had been drawn round the passengers. They had been asked to wait before disembarking. Richetti, dark-faced, sullen, was marched ashore by 2 engineers. Then, after a certain amount of delay, a stretcher was brought. Simon Doyle was carried along the deck to the gangway. He looked a different man, cringing, frightened. All his boyish insouciance vanished. Jacqueline de Belfort followed. A stewardess walked beside her. She was pale, but otherwise looked much as usual. She came up to the stretcher.
"Hello, Simon."
He looked up at her quickly. The old boyish look came back to his face for a moment.
"I messed it up. Lost my head. Admitted everything.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Jackie. I've let you down." She smiled at him then.
"It's all right, Simon. A fool's game, and we lost. That's all."
She stood aside. The bearers picked up the handles of the stretcher. Jacqueline bent down and tied the lace of her shoe. Then her hand went to her stocking top, and she straightened up with something in her hand. There was a sharp, explosive pop. Simon Doyle gave one convulsed shudder, and then lay still. Jacqueline de Belfort nodded. She stood for a minute, pistol in hand. She gave a fleeting smile at Poirot. Then, as Race jumped forward, she turned the little glittering toy against her heart and pressed the trigger. She sank down in a soft, huddled heap.
"Where the devil did she get that pistol?"
Poirot felt a hand on his arm. Mrs. Allerton said softly, "You knew?"
"She had a pair of pistols. I realized when I heard that the first one had been found in Rosalie Otterbourne's handbag the day of the search. Jacqueline sat at the same table as they did. When she realized there was going to be a search, she slipped it into the other girl's handbag. Later she went to Rosalie's cabin and got it back, after having distracted her attention with a comparison of lipsticks. As both she and her cabin had been searched yesterday, it was not thought necessary to do it again."
"You wanted her to take that way out?"
"Yes, but she would not take it alone. That is why Simon Doyle has died an easier death than he deserved."
Love can be a very frightening thing.
That is why most great love stories are tragedies."
Mrs. Allerton's eyes rested upon Tim and Rosalie, standing side by side in the sunlight. And she said suddenly and passionately, "But thank God there is still happiness in the world."
"As you say, madame. Thank God for it."
Presently the passengers went ashore. Later the bodies of Louise Bourget and Mrs. Otterbourne were carried off the Carnac. Lastly the body of Lynette Doyle was brought ashore, and all over the world wires began to hum, telling the public that Lynette Doyle, who had been Lynette Ridgway, the famous, the beautiful, the wealthy Lynette Doyle, was dead.
"Terrible news has reached us from foreign parts. Lynette Doyle, better known to us all as wealthy socialite and businesswoman Lynette Ridgway, is dead, murdered by her husband, Simon Doyle, in league with another woman, his mistress." Shocking times made more shocking by the news that Doyle and his disreputable associate, a girl he reportedly met at a fashionable London nightclub, also murdered Lynette Doyle's innocent maid in order to silence her. And tragically for lovers of literature everywhere, famous novelists low me Osborne, whose incisive mind solved the mystery, but who was gunned down before she could speak. Readers may be interested to know that this paper will be serializing Steaming Hot Iron, a renowned novel telling the story of a poor laundry worker from Halifax and her love of a hard-living foundry worker from Stoke.
Sir George Wold read about it in his London club, and Sterndale Rockford in New York, and Joanna Southwood in Switzerland, and it was discussed in the bar of the Three Crowns in Malton under Wold. And Mr. Burnaby said acutely,
"Well, it doesn't seem to have done her much good. Poor lass."
But after a while they stopped talking about her, and discussed instead who was going to win the Grand National. For, as Mr. Ferguson was saying at that minute in Luxor,
"Listen to me, you archaeologists have got it all wrong. It's not the past that matters, it's the future."